Good afternoon. Welcome to the Big Show. I'm Paul Zeise. The Big Show is what we call it every single day at 5 o'clock. And of course, we do it because we like to summarize what goes on in during the day here in the world of sports. And of course, that usually means we start with the Steelers. I've got to be honest with you. The silly season has begun. I mean, it's been going, but it's now fully begun because everybody, seemingly every single day, has some sort of a report that's going to tie the Steelers to some player that's out there. Period. The latest I'm sure you saw or didn't see was something to do with the fact that the Steelers, quote unquote, inquired about Trevor Lawrence. This came from Ryan Burr. I don't know if you remember Ryan Burr, Baldwin native, real good dude, man. I know he worked with the Golf Channel for a while. I know he worked at Fox Sports Pittsburgh for a while. I know he was on ESPN for a while. And so Ryan is basically now with the Big Ten Network. He does PGA Tour. So he is a good dude. And, of course, I like him a lot. But he reported today basically something to the effect of, and I'll just pull up his actual reporting because he didn't even get it out of his mouth, and there were already people that were basically shooting it down. This one was, Steelers have made inquiries to the Jaguars about a trade for QB Trevor Lawrence. This directly from the horse's mouth in the Jags organization. And then he goes on to say stuff like basically, you know, every team seems to do this and, you know, they're just doing their due diligence. Steelers inquiring about Lawrence speaks volumes to Steelers' unwillingness to just run it back with Wilson or Fields. I don't believe the Jags have any interest in dealing their guy. Good for Omar for asking. Bigger picture, kicking the tires on Lawrenceville with ownership, smart to exhaust every option when you currently have none. So that's what he's out there saying. Now, I think that one of the things that probably makes this whole thing blow up a little bit is the fact that the Jaguars don't have a general manager right now. Who would the Steelers have inquired with when it comes to this? And I'm not doubting Ryan Burr's sources, but I think one of the things that I want to do right here, and this is something I think I'm really good at because I've been doing it for 30 years, is sort of pull back the curtain on journalism and let you kind of understand how things like this happen. Now, of course, Jerry Dulac, our very own Jerry Dulac, he has basically shot the whole thing down, said there's no truth to this at all, and that they weren't looking into it. Some of the other ones that are out there, I know Mark Cabali and a couple of these other ones, they also came at it and basically said this is, there's no truth to this. It didn't happen. This is just lying. I know what's his name, Dale Lawley, who actually works for the Steelers. Dale Lawley said something to the effect of, this is a season where people are just making things up. Okay, look, I'm just going to say this. When it comes to these kinds of things, Omar Khan, and let's just say it like this. Omar Khan is at, some sort of meeting with executives from other teams, blah, blah, blah. They're talking. He happens to be talking to the guy from Jacksonville and says, oh, well, if you guys aren't happy with your quarterback, I mean, what, would you be interested in dealing him? Knowing full well that the answer is no. Well, in the most technical sense, doesn't that mean that there was an inquiry made? Doesn't that mean that there was a, quote, interest in this? Doesn't that mean that there was at least a question asked? And the only reason I bring that up is because I find it amazing that the people that do the reporting on this kind of stuff, right, are so quick to shoot everybody else down if they don't have the same information. But to me, I look at it and I say, I think that largely a lot of this reporting from sources is nonsense anyway. But I also think this. If I, for instance, I'm talking to some people. I'll give you a good example, right? Say I'm the owner or a general manager or even coach of a team. I'm out at I'm out at Archie's. There's a nice plug for Archie. Or better yet, I'm playing golf at Cedarbrook with a bunch of my buddies. And one of them says, "Hey, would you have interest in Trevor Lawrence?" Well, yeah, of course I'd have interest in Trevor Lawrence. Okay, now the buddy tells somebody who tells somebody else who happens to know a reporter, "Hey, Paul Zeise, he says he's interested in Trevor Lawrence." And a report becomes, "Hey, sources say Paul Zeise and the Steelers, they are interested in Trevor Lawrence." Well, in the most technical of sense, I guess that the report is true. But again, when that kind of report comes out from somebody else, it's amazing how many of these guys are really quick to shoot it down. Even though they themselves do the same exact thing with respect to their sources. And believe me, I've seen it many times. I've seen it where people have said, "Oh yeah, so-and-so has interest in this," or "so-and-so has interest in this," or during a coaching search. This is even better. During a coaching search, right? I have, okay, I'm Pitt. I'm looking for a basketball coach. Don't read anything into that, but I'm looking for a basketball coach. I hire, Parker, whatever it's called, the search firm that led to Mike Haywood, whatever the name of that search firm is. I can't imagine it's still open after that debacle. But I hire a search firm. They do a lot of the legwork and they do a lot of the background checking for a lot of different coaches. But they can also, inquire with coaches about, "Hey, would you even be interested in this?" So, next thing you know, I've put feelers out to 30 coaches, say, through my search firm. Because I say to my search firm, "You know what? Go and do a bunch of background checking and come up with a candidates list, and I'll give you some of my own candidates," right? So I might give a search firm 4 or 5 guys. Let's really look into these guys, right? But anybody else you have, we'll look into if you think that they fit what we're looking for. It's just like a headhunter. Okay, so now it becomes, Paul Zeise, the athletic director at Pitt, has interest in this guy, right? And better yet, Parker Searcher Firm or whatever the hell it's called, right? They've actually had a little bit of contact with maybe the agent, or they did a little background checking or whatever. And it's like they've reached out. Even though I've never reached out myself, which is why, okay, now a reporter calls me and says, "Hey, I see this report that says you reached out to, Joe, the coach from Florida A&M or something." And I say, "Well, no, I never reached out to them." So that's how these things happen. The reporter, down in Florida is correct because he had sources that basically said, "Oh, well, and it could be as simple as Florida A&M's coach let his agent know, "Hey, you can leak this out here a little bit that Pitt, contacted me." Even though the contact might have just been, a search firm looking for some basic information on me. Technically, that's contact. Technically, if there's contact, that's interest, right? I don't know. But that's what goes on with all of this stuff. That's why I laugh so hard every single time one of these reports come out where, today's report is that the Steelers were, inquired about Trevor Lawrence, right? And then all of a sudden, the other reporters on the beat all just try to do their best to shoot the whole thing down and dismiss it. Okay? Because the reality is they all do the same thing. That's what you do in the off season when you need material as a reporter. You need to come up with news. You need to come up with scoops. And it used to be in the good old days, right, before there was like a lot of firewalls that were formed around a lot of these people to make it more difficult to have access. It used to be people had really good sources. You know, for instance, when Pitt went through the coaching search that led to Dave Wannstedt, okay, when it led to him getting hired, I had so many sources. I actually knew where Jeff Long was headed before he was even on the plane. Okay? Nowadays, the guys that cover Pitt, they don't have access to that kind of information anymore. It's so much different now than it used to be. The AD and very few people around the AD, all sworn to secrecy, kind of have the idea, maybe a couple of trustees or whatever. There's just not that much information out there anymore when it comes to sourced stuff, which is why we get so many of these kinds of situations where somebody reports that, Trevor Lawrence is on the Steelers' radar. Here's what I'm going to tell you. If he's not on the Steelers' radar, at least on some level, if he's not on some level on the Steelers' radar, here's the thing I'm going to tell you. They're not doing their due diligence. They need a quarterback, and again, it could be really simple. Could be a matter of, at this, at the Senior Bowl maybe, right? Where there's a lot of different people from all the teams that are there. Whatever. Maybe there was a Steelers scout or somebody who was talking to a Jacksonville scout and said something to the effect of, hey, would they ever consider, trading Trevor Lawrence? And of course that became, did you ever do the game when you were young? Right, where, when we were in, say, about first grade, second grade, maybe third grade, maybe even like fourth grade or fifth grade. I forget when it was. We did it a few times in school where you all lined up on your chair, say, there's 15 in your classroom, 15 of you in a row. And the teacher whispers something into the first person's ear and says, you know what? Whisper that into the next, all the way down. Right. And by the time, the teacher would whisper, hey, there are 15 cows in the field and they are grazing and running and having a good time. And by the time it got to the other end, it was like there are 15 cows in the field, 20 horses. There are coyotes chasing them. It's mayhem and murder going on in the field. I mean, just because as it goes down the line, everybody sort of adds their little spin or embellishes or whatever. By the time you get to the end, right? And the message is, obviously, this is how gossip gets started and rumors get started. So what I'm going to tell you is it's kind of similar. That sort of becomes, oh my goodness, the Steelers, even though it was like a scout for the Steelers talking to a scout from Jacksonville, then it becomes a Jacksonville scout goes back and maybe talks to somebody on the ancillary of the front office, right? Maybe looking for leverage or whatever. I don't know, why these things leak, but that's what happens. So I'm just going to tell you, I just don't think that that Ryan Burr made this up, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Did he have good sources? I don't know if he had good. Never going to question somebody like that, ever. Because again, I've been a reporter before. And here's the thing, when I was a reporter for 30 years, right? For what was it, almost 20 years, I was a beat reporter on Pitt or whatever it was, 15 years, whatever. You have to come up with stories every day. And that includes in the off season. And guess what? This guy over here, he happens to be somebody who has overcome a lot of adversity and now he's on the verge of being a starter. Those off-season stories, they only take you so long. And quite frankly, people want news. There are a lot of fans, and many of you are out here and you listen. You want news. You want to know what the Steelers are doing. You want to know what the Pirates are doing. You want to know what the Penguins are doing. You want news. And so even though analysis and opinion is good and all that great stuff, you know what? You get a lot of traction if you break a story like, hey, the Steelers inquired about a guy like Trevor Lawrence. And so, again, I got to be honest with you, I just don't think it's something that he would have made up. Like, it's not something that came out of nowhere. And I think that when you look at it from there, it's basically really, really kind of interesting. But let's just go here. His story, his tweet about the Steelers have made inquiries about Trevor Lawrence, and then he followed it up with they would deal this year's 1 and 2. Right? But I'd be surprised if they dealt next year's 1 because the draft is here next year. He has 208,000 views on that. Okay? 208,000 views is what he has on that. And guess what? You go down, most of the rest of his views are between, here's 1.9 thousand, 2.5 thousand, 2.5 thousand. And then he goes and he does this thing about Trevor Lawrence and the Steelers, and he follows it up, and he's got 208,000 views because people want that kind of stuff. And I'll let you in a little secret. Editors want that kind of stuff too because it's engagement, because they know for a fact if you throw something like that out there, people are going to read it. People are going to read it. And they're going to go and they're going to be, really, really, run with it because people want news, especially in the offseason. So, I understand, where Jerry Dulac and Mark Cabali and some of these other people that, just summarily shot the whole thing down and, there's no truth to it. And I didn't think there was any truth to it anyway. Truth to it from the standpoint of Jacksonville doesn't have a general manager. So who exactly did they inquire with? Who did they ask? Who did they talk to? Obviously not somebody who's going to be making the decision. So I never thought it was true to begin with. But because I don't think that it's true from the standpoint of did the Steelers really legitimately inquire about Trevor Lawrence, I don't believe that Omar Khan and or Andy Weidel, contacted somebody legitimately in the front office of the Jacksonville and said, hey, we would like to put together a package to make a deal for Trevor Lawrence. I don't believe that happened. But having been a reporter, I also don't believe that Ryan Burr lied. I believe that maybe he talked to us. So listen, there's a couple of sources that actually know things, sources that we assign probably far more value to than they actually have, sources who lie flat out, sources who have an agenda. I mean, there's a lot of different sources out there. But if, for instance, again, at the Senior Bowl, some scout from the Steelers was standing around on the sidelines, talked to somebody from Jacksonville, hey, is Trevor Lawrence, you think he'll be available since you're changing coaches and all this other stuff? And then all of a sudden maybe that got back to a couple of people in the Jacksonville organization and one of them had the motivation, or it could be just as simple as, one of them happened to be having a beer with Ryan Burr. Said, yeah, how about this? The Steelers, they actually inquired about Trevor Lawrence's availability. Well, I mean, technically that's true. And so every time something like this happens, it becomes a source war. And it becomes, oh, well, that guy's sources are wrong. And this guy, our sources are right. Even though every single one of these reporters who comes out and lashes out against, whoever has a different source than them or whoever has a different narrative than they have or whatever, right? Every single one of them, I can point to stories that they wrote the same exact way, where they either took a leap of logic or they had a source who had an agenda, or, for instance, if you have these stories coming out about Russell Wilson right now, I mean, who's the source? I would guess his agent, because they're all very self-serving for Russell Wilson. But the reality is, I always like to go with facts. And this thing with Trevor Lawrence, here's where the facts are for me. There's no general manager in Jacksonville. So who was the inquiry made for? Who did they inquire with? Who did they go talk to? There's nobody in charge right now except for the owner. And I guarantee you nobody went to the owner and said, hey, is Trevor Lawrence going to be? So that's the fact there. When it comes to Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, you know what the fact is for me? I'll tell you what the fact is for me. That Mike Tomlin puffed out his chest after week, 7? So the first 6 weeks he had Justin Fields playing. Week 7 and 8, they played 2 horrible teams and Russell Wilson looked good. And he puffed out his chest when someone said, boy, that was a bold move to change quarterbacks at 4-2. And he said, well, that's why I'm highly compensated. That tells me that Mike Tomlin, Russell Wilson was Mike Tomlin's guy. And there's no other way around that. So all of these reports of people saying, oh, well, these guys are just making up stories and all this other stuff. No. Always look at facts. Number one. Number two, always use common sense. If you don't have facts, use common sense. And number three, understand that this guy could write a story based on sources. This guy could write a story that is contradictory based on sources, and neither one of them is lying. Neither one of them is lying. Now, should it be that way? Probably not. But I'll give you a great example, okay? A great example. A bunch of years ago when Pitt was going through a coaching search, there were a number of people that were around the search that were steering everybody in the direction that Tom Bradley was going to be the guy. You remember that? One guy actually had a source that told him it was a done deal, and he went with done deal, which, reporting 101, you never go done deal until it's a done deal. And it's never a done deal until the school or the team actually reports it. Well, for me, you know what I'm saying? Even when I knew somebody was going to be hired, even when I knew somebody was getting the job, even when I knew they were in the building, it still was Joe Schmo is expected to be the next coach until school says, hey, we've hired this guy. Now it's a done deal. We can use that word. But anyway, long story short, I had all of the same sources as those guys. But here's the thing. I had an ace in the hole who was a really good source, probably as close to the source as it could be. And he was telling me it's going to be Todd Graham. And, they're reporting, there was the day the done deal thing came out and all that, and a bunch of people were reporting out it's expected to be Tom Bradley. I wrote a story that said tomorrow morning, Donna Sampt and Jerry Cochran and Steve Peterson or whoever it was, the AD and Nordenberg were all flying down to Dallas to try and close the deal with Todd Graham. Tom Bradley is still a very strong candidate, but the reality is it wasn't a done deal there. And all of those people, except for the guy that reported done deal, that was stupid. But all of the people that were reporting, they're moving in, they're close with Tom Bradley. I mean, they all had good sources to a point, but they all sort of jumped the gun. And what I'm saying is, when I looked at that, I had some people that were emailing me, you're an idiot, you're the only one saying this, you're just trying to stir the pot, blah, 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 blah. You don't have, and my thing was, listen, I have, in my stories about Todd Graham, acknowledged that Tom Bradley is a very strong candidate. But my point was, those guys aren't necessarily making things up, and they're not necessarily wrong in terms of what they're reporting, except for they're missing a big piece of this, which is the leading candidate, the one they really want is Todd Graham. And so, if Todd Graham doesn't work out, then they're probably going to go in a different direction. And it might very well be Tom Bradley. But my point is, just because there's conflicting reports, it doesn't mean reporters are lying. Number one, it doesn't mean that they're trying to push their own agenda. Number two, it just means they've sourced the story maybe a little bit different, or they've got bad sources, which that happens too. And so, I don't want to go on, I didn't want this to become me preaching about it, but it's one of the things that probably burns my ass more than anything else is that when somebody reports something, everybody that didn't have it, they go out of their way to try and find their sources who say that's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. And what's funny is sometimes when they say that's wrong, this is wrong, blah, 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 all of a sudden, you know what? When something turns out to be true or partially true or happen or whatever, right? They all sort of just move on and act as if they didn't try and shoot it out of the sky. This thing with Trevor Lawrence, I can tell you, is just it's no. I would put it to you this way: there's almost zero chance that it's going to happen, obviously. And there's probably almost zero chance that Omar Khan and or somebody that's a decision maker inquired with the Jacksonville Jaguars. But I also think there's zero chance Ryan Burr just made this up. And I think that's the thing. Being a reporter, I can absolutely see how something like this would happen. I mean, seriously, if think about it this way. If the scenario happened, and I don't know if this is happening, don't say, oh, Zeise said this is what happened. I'm just sort of spitballing a little bit to kind of give you an idea of how sources get to where they go. But, if, for instance, the scenario I laid out where a Steelers scout and somebody that is his buddy or he knows from Jacksonville were standing on the sidelines at the Senior Bowl practices, and they just started, spitballing a little bit and all that other good stuff and, shooting the breeze, whatever. Okay, so they do that. And that's what happens when the one says, hey, would you guys ever consider trading Trevor Lawrence? I mean, in the most technical sense, that's the Steelers sort of inquiring about Trevor Lawrence, even though it really isn't. But it is. Then this guy goes back to his front office, right? And there's some exec that happens to be there. Obviously, there's no general manager, but let's say there's somebody who works in the front office. Maybe they're director of scouting or, whatever, player personnel guy, whatever it is. And he happens to be at an event where Ryan Burr is at, and they're having a few beers, and he says, yeah, the Steelers inquired about this, blah, 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 blah. People say, well, you need 2 sources or 3 sources or 4 sources. You know what? When you get it from somebody that's right in the front office, you basically nowadays you say, well, it's someone from the front office. I'm just saying, I don't get worked up about this kind of stuff like all these other guys do. I don't, take it as an affront that, Ryan Burr is just looking for engagement. Now, clearly, 208,000 views means it worked. He got engagement, but I don't think that's really what, clearly he was looking for that, but I don't think he just made something up. And I don't think it's a case of where he, called, John Q. Public, who happens to be a plumber that, walked into the Jacksonville facility and fixed the toilet and, this is his source. I don't think that's the case either. I take him at his word that he probably did talk to somebody that actually works in the Jacksonville front office who basically said, yeah, they inquired about it. And then, he took it a step further to basically said, that he thinks they might give the 1 or the 2. Well, that's him. He's just guessing. And he even says he's just guessing and spitballing. I mean, so I don't know. I think we're in the silly season. We definitely are in the silly season. And the silly season, is what it is. It's a situation of where everybody is feeling pressed to come up with something fresh, something new, something that'll get people talking. And the next thing you know, once they do, you've achieved what you're looking to achieve, right? I just don't think that people quite understand how it works. That's the reality of it. And I think that's going to be, what you have to understand going forward is that just because people have different sourcing, just because two reporters report similar or different things, it doesn't mean one's lying and one's not. Now, here's the one thing I will tell you to take this one step further. I look at track record. There are certain guys in this town that always seem to have news, and it 80% of the time is nonsense, right? We know who they are. They always seem to have news, and they're wrong all the time. Sooner or later, you say, okay, maybe we should stop listening to this person or taking this person seriously. There are some people who have news, right, that they make a mountain out of molehills and, create all these, wow, this is an exclusive. This is, I'm the only person that has this, blah, 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 blah. And then you read it and it's like a big nothing burger, right? So what I'm telling you is when you look through these things, you also have to consider the source of actually who's doing the reporting. There are some guys who seem to get it right far more often than they get it wrong. I mean, for a long, long time, the best reporter in this town was Ed Bouchette. And when it came to the Pirates, believe it or not, the best reporter in town probably was Bob Schmeiser in terms of having really good sources and knowing exactly what's going on. And the reality. So my point is, when you have a track record, and then you have, something you get it wrong maybe once in a while or not quite right, then people say, maybe bad sourcing, maybe source lied, maybe that happens. But if somebody continually reports stuff and is continually wrong, then you say, okay, why are we even listening to this person? So I think that really this was sort of hopefully very helpful in terms of what really probably happened here with this Trevor Lawrence story. Why it's probably a nothing burger. Well, not probably, is a nothing burger, but it's the off season and it gives people fodder, I guess, to talk about it. By the way, the game's always on at Archie's. Get down to Archie's on Carson Street. Archie's, home of 80-cent wings Monday through Thursday. Home of the Paul Zeise grilled cheese sandwich. When you get down there, say hello to Archie for me and tell him I sent you. I think that when you look at what the Steelers are doing, just kind of put a bow on this, I would have a lot more interest in Trevor Lawrence than pretty much all these other names that I've heard. Because Trevor Lawrence is young enough. He's a guy that you could say, hey, if he works out, we're going to build our team around him. Unlike Aaron Rodgers, Matthew Stafford, Russell Wilson, all these guys who are basically, a one-year bridge guy. To me, you sign Justin Fields and you bring in another veteran, and then you start to figure out a strategy either this year or next year. What are you going to do to draft a quarterback? That's what you should do. The other thing you should do is once you get that secure, go and make sure that you make the rest of your team good around your quarterback. Fill the holes on your defense, fill the holes on your offensive line, fill the holes at receiver, and move on. And corner, and move on. So I just think that that's what is sensible and makes a lot of sense. I think that when we look at it from that standpoint, that's what's sensible and that's what makes a lot of sense. But as far as the daily, this is who the Steelers inquired about, or this is who they talked about, or, there's some reports that say that they're looking at this guy or whatever, just understand the word interest means a lot of things, especially when there's no precursor to that word. If I say I have interest in this, I mean, I'm not telling you if I have passing interest, if I have not really much more than no interest, or if I have a lot of interest. So if you hear the Steelers have, I mean, I'll make a statement that I guarantee you is true. The Steelers would be interested in trading for Patrick Mahomes. Right? Of course they're interested. The next step is inquired. Right? What does inquire actually mean and entail? That's the next step. Again, when you hear the Steelers inquired about Trevor Lawrence, your first reaction is, no way. Your second reaction is, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? Does it mean, low-level people from both teams talked? Does it mean that the front offices talked? Does it mean that Mike Tomlin was there with the new coach down there and he talked? I mean, what does that mean? So, at any rate, I think that when you look at it from that standpoint, you'll be a lot less angry with all of these reports that come out. And actually, you can kind of be like me and just sort of laugh, sit back and laugh at these guys who are all, so hell-bent on being the authority and being right, that anytime somebody brings up something or reports something that they don't have or don't like, they basically do everything in their power to shoot it down. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. They want to do everything in their power to discredit and shoot it down, period. And so, this guy, Ryan Scarpizio, he's a great dude. Used to be Steelers media guy, just summed it up well. It's February 13th. I'm already done with this Steelers offseason. It's insufferable on here. That's on Twitter. Honestly, that's the truth. It is insufferable, but guess what? We still got another 6, 8, 10. Well, I'm sorry, 6. What is this? February, March, April, May, June, July, August, until they start playing meaningful football games. 6 more months of this nonsense. 6 more months of these kinds of reports. 6 more months of these clashing sources, insisting that, I'm right and this guy's wrong, and here's why my sources are right and this guy's sources are wrong and everything else. We got 6 more months of this nonsense. It's incredible. Anyway, tomorrow we'll end the week on the right note. We've got some Pirates, Steelers, and all kinds of other stuff. Until then, enjoy your day.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.